saying this is my first presentation as a business owner. So I was maybe a little ahead of the game in my title, from burnout to business owner. I've now been a business owner for 4 days officially. So I was taught sell first, create later. And this is what I was trying to do. So I'm very excited to be here with you this morning. I've actually just launched my website an hour ago. So I've been messing around with fixes and things like that. So it's very nice to be here today. So what I'd like to do today is, I believe we have 20 minutes or so, and then time for questions at the end if we'd like that. So I'll just introduce who I am, what my story is, what a burnout was for me, and then go into how that has led me to starting my own company. I was introduced a little bit already. My name does sound very Dutch, but I'm actually half English, half Sri Lankan. My mom is English and my dad is Sri Lankan. I was born in Sweden, and I've lived in Spain and India, in Kashmir in India. I've studied in the UK at Warwick and at Cardiff, and I'm currently living in the Netherlands. And my ethnic background is actually Dutch burger, burger being the word for citizen. So we are actually descendants of the Dutch East Indias Company, the VOC. And actually Wambeek is a town in Belgium. So I am descendant of somebody who came on a ship's captain to Sri Lanka, and then this ethnic group was formed. Burghers are actually raised speaking English as a first language. We don't necessarily speak the local languages of Sinhalese and Tamil in Sri Lanka, and usually a lot more westernized in terms of women. They often drink and smoke and wear trousers, and you could say less traditional. So it's actually a coincidence that I'm in the Netherlands now for work, and people can pronounce both my names. I get emails every day in Dutch, and I respond in English, and I get an email back saying, don't worry, I speak Dutch. And then when I need to explain that I follow, but I'm not fluent, it's an interesting conversation. So as I mentioned, I have recently launched my company, and I am an interculturalist. I actually didn't know this term for a long time, but it's essentially someone who facilitates interaction across cultures, and someone who is comfortable in more than one culture, who can operate effectively between cultures, and who can be a bridge. So I was extremely excited when I saw on LinkedIn that this is actually a position that people have. It's a job title. And I thought, wow, this is what I've been since I was born. I have been bridging cultures, and that is actually the red thread as well in my professional career. So far, I have worked in think tanks attached to foreign policy. I've worked at a research institute, most recently at a bank. And as of last week, I am now self-employed. And my story today, what I'd like to share with you is, it's been almost exactly 2 years now since I had a burnout. And I have to say, when we go through this, I feel very privileged to be at a stage now where I can talk to you about this. I would like to make very clear that burnout is something we will be discussing, but it is different from other mental health conditions, things like depression. I won't be going into that today. That is an aside, but just to let you know right now, we will primarily be looking at burnout. And honestly, when I was diagnosed, because it is a diagnosis here in the Netherlands, it completely shocked me because this was not a concept I knew about. And I would be very interested to hear, what does a burnout mean to you? Great, we have a lot of a couple of not sures, something I personally relate to, and a legitimate medical illness. I think this is Very interesting. It's quite telling as well of the audience. I have done this talk for a more Asian audience, and Sri Lanka in particular. It was 80–90% not a thing I believe in, which is also why I didn't recognize it as something that could happen to me. I think to start with a definition, because this is not something I knew, actually what a burnout is, and this definition is by Freudenberger, probably saying that wrong, but it's classified in 3 ways. Emotional exhaustion, a decreased sense of accomplishment, and depersonalization. And what I was told is it's a kind of fatigue from carrying too much for too long. To me, this was very difficult to distinguish from work stress in general. At the end of 2019, I was very stressed, and my plan was to go home and have a holiday. And I thought, okay, I will come back, I'll be rested, I'll be ready to go. And it was actually my manager who said, no, look, I'm signing you off sick from tomorrow. You will not be coming into work. The company doctor will be in touch with you. This did not help my feeling of stress and panic, because I didn't understand really the Dutch medical system, the fact that I was still going to be paid. This all seemed overwhelming to me. And I think in hindsight now, when I look back, there was a difference between extreme stress and burnout. I was doing things which are very uncharacteristic. I got on the metro in the wrong direction to go to work more than once. I'm not usually someone who does that. I also booked flight tickets 3 times wrong, one to the wrong destination, on the wrong day, and on the wrong airline, while checking multiple calendars. Basically, I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. Things which should have been easy were not. And I do have to say this, when I was diagnosed with a burnout, here it says that it's classed as an occupational phenomena, and it's not classified as a medical condition. This is actually by the ICD. In the Netherlands, a burnout is a medical condition. And the gatekeeper, or the person who would diagnose you, is a doctor or a medical professional. I believe there are only 1 or 2 other countries in the world where that is the case, and I think one of them is Denmark. If you have a different experience, I'd be very happy to hear. So essentially, that was what burnout was for me. And I didn't start thinking about why I didn't recognize what this burnout was for a good 6 months. I think once I was given a diagnosis, I slept, and I didn't really, I was not really capable of doing very much at all. So I think the fact that I had been signed off work was needed. But when I was back in Sri Lanka, resting, my friends, I have a lot of family there, they all said, what is this idea of burnout? Aren't you just stressed? Was it your company who told you you can go off sick? There was a huge lack of understanding. And then I think about a year, when I was reintegrating back into the workforce, I started exploring the idea of burnout being something cultural. And the more I looked into it, the more I see that the concept of burnout has indeed spread across the globe. It did start, you could say, being officially classified in Western Europe, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and then the Nordic countries, Scandinavia and Finland, and Israel. And it was actually from the mid-1990s that burnout was also observed in Western, Middle, and Eastern Europe, then Asia, Middle East, Australia, New Zealand. And what the research says is, after the turn of the last century, the research and diagnoses of burnout also spread to Africa, China, and the Indian subcontinent. So I found this quite interesting, that very generally speaking, the order in which burnout and the prevalence of the word and the diagnosis seems to have spread really does seem to correspond to the socio-economic development of the countries involved. And that didn't seem very surprising to me, because it made sense. In Sri Lanka, it is, well, currently a middle income country, but at the time it was a lower income country. It is a developing country. And that got me thinking about, okay, burnouts are cultural. What I'll go on to describe, of course, is the symptoms of burnout are not cultural. They are universal. We are all people in the same way. So what I find interesting to look at is, although the notion, the idea of burnout seems to have spread across the globe, it's still unclear, or there's still a lot of academic debate, whether it's a Western phenomena. And the reason for this is research-based. Basically, most of the non-Western burnout studies are exact replications of studies that have been conducted in Western Europe. And these don't take the cultural factors into consideration. And from my research, there have actually been a very small number of studies which have compared the prevalence of burnout across 2 or more countries. And even the ones that do exist, they lack some kind of cross-cultural perspective from what I have read, because the differences in the prevalence are described, but they're not really explained in terms of socioeconomic cultural differences. And I think for me, the easiest example to show is the difference between the Netherlands and Sri Lanka. The Netherlands is where I'm based and where I was when I received my diagnoses. The Netherlands has excellent social security systems. Medical professionals, so doctors, are the gatekeepers. And if you are diagnosed with a burnout by a doctor, it is considered a medical illness. And interestingly, there's this word, it's called overspannenheid. It literally means overstrain. And this term existed in the Netherlands and possibly Belgium and other countries long before the term burnout was acknowledged. I have colleagues who say, oh yeah, my parents or my grandparents, they use this term. I find that quite interesting and telling. Thank you for the comment, Vanessa, I can see that. I'm quite interested in the fact that this overstrain concept existed, and then it's since evolved into the idea of burnout as a medical condition. In Sri Lanka, on the other hand, you are actually only entitled to no more than 7 days sick leave after you've completed 1 year of continuous service. So when I came here and I said, oh, you know, how many days annual leave do I have? How many days sick leave do I have? My manager looked at me and she said, well, you have as many sick days as you are sick. And this concept didn't compute to me. And I'm someone who's lived in Western Europe a lot of my life. So indeed, it is 2 extremes. And I think I am very privileged to be living in a country where a burnout is a medical condition. I am now fully reintegrated. I reintegrated back into the workforce almost 18 months later. So it was quite a long time that I was off. And there was significant support from my company in terms of coaching, in terms of career coaching. That is actually what led me to start my own business. And what I find interesting here is I started wondering, is a burnout a privileged thing to have had? And this really weighed on me for a long time. And I thought, you know, do I have a right to burnout? I have all my basic needs met. You know, I have a lot of my psychological needs met. And And then I started thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Of course, I know that, academically, this is still heavily contested. There are issues. But what struck me is the top. I was asked a question regularly at work by my manager, by the doctor, what gives you energy? And this to me was an unheard of concept. What gives you energy at work? And I thought, well, I get a salary, I work, I'm good at my work. But that wasn't the question. The question is really, what do you enjoy doing? What is your full potential? And that's when I realized we are talking about, in my opinion, this part of the pyramid, possibly feeling of accomplishment as well. But I found that very interesting, and it took me a long time to kind of accept that I was also allowed to reach these levels of the pyramid, in my own estimation. And that then led me to leaving the corporate world. As I mentioned, I did so only last week. So it is all still very fresh and new. And I'm now launching my own company. Actually, in the corporate world, I worked within the compliance department for 3 years, and most recently in the diversity and inclusion team. And I realized my sphere, where I would like to do work, is in the belonging field. And how I view this is that there are a lot of people who say diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. That is probably the most in vogue quote at the moment. But for me, what's important here is belonging. Who and why do we have to wait to be invited or to be asked? Who is doing the inviting and the asking? And for me, the idea of being able to choose, that is where true belonging is. And actually, othering for me is the opposite of belonging. So othering implies, the whole us and them. You have a different way of thinking. I am more the norm. And this is really what led me into deciding to start a company based on training people about intercultural awareness. And I will be honest, I didn't realize this was a job. As someone who's been raised cross-culturally, I've always been to international schools. This was something that we all kind of knew. Everyone's perspective is very different. Of course, that's simplistic. But really, working in a corporate, I saw the issues that people have working cross-culturally, even in teams that, get along on surface level. They are very productive, but there are misunderstandings. And what I have decided is that through training, both team and leadership, I really want to share my vision of what I would like inclusiveness and belonging to mean. I also feel quite strongly about themes along identity and culture, as you can imagine from my background. And I really am looking forward to starting this business and essentially starting a new career. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I'd be very interested to hear from you, any thoughts.